Cool. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. This is our inaugural episode of America Reenvisioned. The general forum for this is a dialogue between myself and my father as a trusted educator, but also from his fatherly wisdom that comes imbued. I'm sure they give some sort of certificate once you have a kid of that comes with dad jokes, but it also is just a book of useless knowledge, I'm sure, as well. So this is, it's kind of funny to introduce you like this, but this is Dr. Curtis Smith, PhD, 7-year veteran in the United States Navy, serving as an electronic warfare technician, multiple deployments overseas in the Asia Pacific op area. My dad now has 30 years of experience in education, serving in both the public, private, and international sectors, primarily working for public schools, but also for-profits in curriculum development. And at one point was the esteemed California Teacher of the Year. Not that he's peaked, of course, but my dad is a published author for River of Change, which was his thesis on the cultural and environmental impacts of the Elwha Dam here in the Pacific Northwest, and has a doctorate in systems of education. And currently he is the physics and engineering teacher at North Monterey High School near the Salinas, Middle California area. So welcome, Dad.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, Aaron. So Aaron, obviously my son. So I've known him all his life. Yeah. And so Aaron has had good or bad the opportunity to live all over the world. So he's lived in England, Germany, Costa Rica, and of course the United States, which has given him huge international experience growing up. But finally graduated high school in Bellevue, Washington, and then attended and graduated the United States Naval Academy. So very proud of him. Bachelor of Science. Then after the Naval Academy, was assigned to the USS McCampbell out of Yokosuka, Japan, 7th Fleet. So he served overseas in the South China Sea operating area, and is currently at the Naval Surface and Mine Warfare Development Center as a prospective warfare tactics instructor. So he's on his way to becoming an expert in surface warfare tactics. So welcome, Aaron.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. So my dad and I have had this conversation about starting a podcast for quite some time now. And it's been sparked by a couple different events. The podcast will primarily talk about the most pressing issues in America, hopefully in a pretty bipartisan, contextualizing way. But a lot of this dialogue was prompted by not just the pandemic, but just the open international conversation from social media and all these different news outlets about where our issues as a country lie. Where do we need to be putting our finances? Where do we need to put our focus? And Dad, I think you actually had a much better explanation for why this conversation needs to be had now in this way.
Well, it's been interesting for both of us, having lived now in other countries and seeing the United States from outside looking in, looking back on our home country, and having a lot of conversations with people overseas where we lived and how they viewed the United States. And then giving me a chance and Aaron a chance to re-look at our country. I mean, we're both devout patriots, both have served in our military. He is serving, I did serve. But it is interesting to look at the United States through new eyes, almost a new perspective on things. And so I hear all the time, unfortunately, how the United States, for lack of a better term, is going to hell in a handbasket. That things are just collapsing, things are falling apart, it's going the bad way. But all the research, all the indicators, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the Labor Department, whether it's Homeland Security, whether it's the State Department, et cetera, all show that things in the United States are actually doing really, really well. And in most cases, getting better and better in many, many ways. We've almost, not completely, but we've almost eradicated poverty, for example. what we call poverty today is nothing compared to what it was back in the days of like the Dust Bowl or the pioneering days. Education, our literacy rates through the roof. We have a literacy rate in the United States of 98%. You know, unbelievable. You know, 100 years ago, half that. Medical technological advances, quality of life advances, opportunity advances, equality advances in gender, racial, ethnic diversity. I mean, so there's all these indicators. Now, that doesn't mean it's all, you know, unicorns and rainbows and everything's going great. No, obviously we have problems. Obviously we have things we need to keep the good fight going. And that's really where this came out of, I think, is we do need to keep the good fight. And there's certain key areas like infrastructure that we're going to talk about. That's one of those good fights we need to keep, right? To keep this country going and keep it on track and where it needs to be. And so there's a lot of talk about infrastructure. You know, President Biden right now just reached a deal with the GOP on his infrastructure package. And of course, that's been debated and everything. So that's really trying to look at America, re-envision it. You know, now that we've come back to the United States after all these years, I mean, between us, we probably have close to 40 countries we've been to. I mean, a lot. And like I said, lived in a few of them. And so having that perspective and be able to look back and say, where do we need now for the country to go is what this is.
Yeah, and I couldn't think of a better segue. I think there was a recent interview with Michael Bloomberg where he was talking about like the private sector for infrastructure. And he said, infrastructure, it's not a sexy term. And as I've told my dad and I've told all my friends previously, I've actually like vehemently disagree. I think it's one of the sexiest words we can throw into any public policy conversation. It's just maintenance aspects of infrastructure that isn't entirely glamorous. Everyone wants to build a new bridge. Everyone wants to like build a new canal or a new underground highway system, but it's the decay. And we'll hit on a couple of those points here. But just to kick us off, I have a couple data points just to like set the tone for why we're having this conversation on infrastructure. So America was just recently rated number 16 overall for infrastructure quality ranks, putting us behind countries like Germany, France, Japan. Current delays in port congestion, locks, facilities for larger ships have added an estimated $33 billion to the cost of US imports since 2010. This has obviously been an ongoing issue. I mean, this doesn't happen overnight. So where we begin is giving a little bit of historical context. And it's a little cliche, but I think our primary point is defining infrastructure. So we're all talking about the same issue. Merriam-Webster, for example, defines infrastructure as the resources, personal, building, or equipment required for the basis of an activity. But we both recently read an article by Cain, who's a published historian at the University of Chicago, and he provides a little bit of clarity to that definition. That the subordinate parts of almost every technological system, the track, the terminals, or the railway, the technological system, and the waterworks, the wires, and satellites of a telecommunication system. So much more complex, a multilateral issue than just bridges
and that's a huge bite to chew on, right? That, when you look at infrastructure, like you were saying, it's much more than what people think. I think when you throw out infrastructure, reason people don't think it's sexy is you think, oh, filling potholes in roads, fixing rusted bridges. That infrastructure is all about railway and roads. One small piece of that puzzle. All right, those are one small piece of the puzzle. So when we talk about infrastructure, your sewage treatment plants, your power grids, your fresh water supplies, your telecommunications, all of this goes into infrastructure. And so when Cain said that it's all the different pieces, technology included, to keep a society going, if you really stop and think for a second and stop and go, okay, what does it take to really keep a modern city going? I mean, really, what is behind the scenes, that the unsung heroes, the non-glamorous, entities that keep that city going? From the people sweeping the streets and picking up the trash, the people managing the power grid, to the Wi-Fi networks, the roads, the rail, to the subways, the public education, even the hospitals, all of these things are necessary to keep a modern city alive. They're all components of this organism, right? They're all like the little organs that keep that major entity, that major living thing, a city, alive. So we're not just talking about filling potholes and go, oh, our roads suck. All right, we know they do. We live in California. The roads suck. We get it, but much, much more involved.
Well, the historical aspects of that, I mean, we're looking beginning in like the 19th century, right? When we're talking about taking off infrastructure as a young country, trying to make our own in this massive territory, where we're primarily a maritime nation at the beginning, and we still like largely are. But as we're looking to really, hooyah, but as we're really like looking to exploit this huge geography, we're having the conversation in the early 1800s of how can I cut down on commerce costs by making a more efficient transportation system. And that's when we're having those, and I think it was really interesting in the Cain's article to have that point that President Madison at the time saying it's unconstitutional for the federal government to invest in the building of what is called the National Road at the time, or the Great Road, going from north to south. That's a setback, right? And that's just a federal setback that we have out the gate. But I think one, not to say that history repeats itself, wink, wink, but that's where we see now the growth of the private sector. And I know, Dad, that's something that you're passionate about when we start talking about automobiles. But even so far back as the early 1800s with the Pennsylvania Lancaster Turnpike Company, and we're having private companies invest in the road building, and then the fight over real estate for the railroads, huge influx in jobs, dominated by the private sector early on. And I think largely the success that we saw from that, and then where that kind of hand gets turned over, just the lack of upkeep from there.
Well, you're right. I mean, we've had a love-hate relationship in America with infrastructure. You look at the Erie Canal. I went my undergrad to Penn State and been up to the Erie Canal, and one of the greatest infrastructure things ever built to open up the United States to commerce and increase their economy. When the Erie Canal was built, it all of a sudden linked the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean. So now steel, coal, timber can go from Ohio River Valley, Michigan area, Pennsylvania area, all the way to Europe and beyond because of the Erie Canal opening it up. No one complained when the Erie Canal was built that, wow, this was a bad investment. Why would we do that? Because it brought enormous prosperity to the young United States. But that is an infrastructure project. Now, the Erie Canal was built with public money, taxpayer money. It was an investment in the future of the country. And it turned out to be a huge payoff for what was put into that infrastructure. And still today, the Erie Canal is well used, over 150 years later. Same thing with the Tennessee River Valley Authority. I mean, massive, massive electrical hydro dam projects being built all through the Tennessee River Valley area. Again, huge public works project, massive amount of public funding that went into it over a long period of time. But today, powers over half the electricity on the Eastern Seaboard. And again, people don't complain when they turn on their light bulb that they have electricity, But again, yes, that was an infrastructure project. Again, an investment into the United States. So we've seen things from the railroads, the Erie Canal, to hydroelectric plants, to maintaining the Mississippi River, the intercoastal waterway on the East Coast. These are all infrastructure projects that have reaped huge, huge rewards back in the United States development and growth and made us the world power. Now, were a lot of that paid with taxpayer money? Yeah, most of it was paid with taxpayer money. So this is that love-hate dichotomy, right? We love that we have electricity. We love that we have economic prosperity. We love that we have great transportation, but I hate paying taxes. You know, it's
like the most American thing ever is like,
yeah, and it is.
I don't want to pay taxes.
I want to pay, I want all this stuff, but I want it for free. And I get the natural tendency. I mean, public school teacher, so I'm not rich. I look at my paycheck and go, yeah, they're taking some good taxes out. However, I look at what I get for that tax dollar, right? So I don't want to get too much into the money aspect like that for right now. But you do have to understand the historical perspective, like Aaron was saying, that the United States has always invested in infrastructure, and we've always had a love-hate affair with infrastructure. We have historically greatly, exponentially benefited for our investment in infrastructure. In recent years, and again, why this topic for this broadcast is in recent years, infrastructure has been kind of a taboo word. We don't want to go there. We don't want to invest in that. Ooh, we'd have to raise tax dollars for that. We'd have to divert public funds for that. And so what we've seen since the 1960s is a sharp, sharp decline in investment in infrastructure. Very, very noticeable. We're not building new railways. We're not building new interstates, highway systems. We're not replacing old worn out bridges. We're not building new hydroelectric plants. We're not building new power grid systems. We stopped doing all that because now infrastructure is like, ooh, boo hiss, boo hiss. No, no, we don't want to do that. Well, wait a second. Having your cake and eat it too. It was that investment that our forefathers, our grandparents and their parents and their parents had the foresight to go, you know what, we're going to suck it up and we're going to invest in this. And in turn, we're going to build a mighty nation. And they did. Now our generation comes along, and I won't pretend to be a psychologist, sociologist, but we do seem to have this mentality where it's like, we have it good in all of us, all walks of life. We have this American entitlement that we get all this stuff because, well, we're Americans. So we get all this stuff, right? We always have clean water. We always have sanitation. We always have electricity. We always have this. And then when the power goes down, like here in California, we have rolling blackouts, right? Because of the power grid system. Or in the Northeast, a blizzard takes down the power grid and all of Manhattan loses electricity. We're outraged. We're furious. How dare that happen to us? Well, wait a second. Again, you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you want these things, then we have to invest in infrastructure. And what investing that infrastructure looks like, that I will concede is up to debate. Because we have basically three entities. We have the private sector that invests in infrastructure, like Carnegie Mellon, back in the railroad days, investing in the iron and the steel to build a railroad. So private sector has invested. We have local authorities, local cities, towns, counties, even states that invest in their roads, their bridges. And then we have the big bucks, which are the federal government, investing in major projects, like the Federal Works Program back from FDR back in the 1930s, 1940s, where the Federal Works Project built things like the Tennessee River Valley Authority and things like that. So what combination of those three entities, private, local, and federal, to invest in infrastructure, those are the conversations we need to have, is how are we going to have investment. But to not invest in infrastructure, I don't feel personally, I think Aaron has his own viewpoint, but I don't think how investing in infrastructure is not an option. I don't see how you can say it's not an option. Yeah.
I love that you brought up those three entities, because actually I have a point here that I wrote down specifically for this talk. But you take the highway system, for example, right? So the Highway Trust Fund is sponsored by the national gas tax, and the national gas tax obviously is pulls from every time you fill up your car. That what you pay at the tank there is taxed. There's an influx of it. That hasn't been adjusted for inflation since the 1970s. So that we're slowly eating away at our trust fund, and there hasn't been an updated source of revenue for filling that piggy bank. And there was the University of Maryland article that I referenced earlier, actually broke out highway spending as a percentage for local, state, and federal funding, right? So for like the local entities, drastically decreased, which depending on how you view that could be a good thing, but I don't necessarily think King County needs to be paying for the interstate. Federal spending peaked in the 1930s, which is historically we understand because of military might and a desire to move military tanks and planes down the highway system, right? That's like one of those historical fun facts for what the interstate system was designed for. In its origin was moving military might. State funding has only steadily increased since 1905, and hit a peak in 1990 with taking up about 8% of a state's budget. Is just repairing their own highway systems. And so this is where you had huge variance crossing the border. When I go from Arizona to New Mexico, and you're talking about those potholes, you start seeing more of those potholes. You're like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like this is a intra-national commerce system that we have. And it's because we've become, this is a personal statement I'm about to make, right? Hands up. But
That's right.
It's because we've become so reliant upon our highway systems. So like a brief anecdote, right? And I've told this story to my dad now like 3 or 4 times, but living in Japan, when I was stationed in Japan, I went from the most northern to the most southern point of Japan over the course of a couple weeks, and every back alley route in Japan, and explored that country thoroughly. Never once did I get in a car. Not once. And they have this amazing system, the Passmo, right? This sounds really like expat of me, play high in this other country, but it's just a wildly efficient system. Because to your point, Dad, it's like that foresight to invest in like, hey, let's make this let's integrate our country with a well thought out, well planned infrastructure that allows people to easily commute to work and for us to transport commerce, and that is affordable and all part of the same system and doesn't require an Oyster card here and cash only buses here, and a little degree of standardization and unifying that I think our country could learn from.
And absolutely, we lived in Germany, and the running joke, one of the many running jokes of living in Germany, is if the train is late, it's not that the train is late, it's that your watch is wrong. And it's pretty darn true. I mean, those trains run in Germany on a strict schedule. And the time that we lived there taking trains, I never had a late train or missing train. Again, but Germany, who ranks above us, as Aaron was saying earlier, in infrastructure grade, they invested that. And what does that do for the average person? So for those of you out there thinking, well, what do I care about trains? I don't take the train. But, okay, you indirectly do use the train because and this is what people don't understand. That's one of the reasons why we're talking about.
No, I love this. I love this topic.
Yeah, I love Starbucks, right? I'm from Seattle, and I got to have my Starbucks. I get that I live in San Juan Bautista, California. It's a nice area. It's not affordable for most people. Plain and simple. On a teacher's salary, it's a stretch, right? But since we didn't have to pay for Aaron's college, that worked out really well. The
stroke of luck.
There you go. Went to the academy. Now, that barista at Starbucks could not afford to live where I do. Now, I have no qualms with people that work at baristas. I don't care what walk of life you're from. I have friends all up and down the socioeconomic spectrum. All right, that's not the point. I recognize that barista making $15 an hour needs to get to work. I want my Starbucks. I can drive to Starbucks. It's on the way to work. On the way to school, there's a Starbucks. However, that barista doesn't have that luxury. She needs to take the train in or the bus in. Now, do I want her there to take my order? Absolutely, of course I do. So therefore, am I indirectly dependent on the train system to get my coffee? Of course I am, right? Because the people that work those jobs, that commute, need those trains, and I need those people. So when we sit there and we say things, make these wild statements like, "Oh, I don't need the train." Yeah, you do. I don't ever take the bus. You might not take the bus, but how about that medical assistant at the doctor's office? How about that person at the gas station? How about that person at Starbucks? Right? What are they taking to get to work?
This is a sneak peek of a future episode where we'll be talking about gentrification.
Yeah, and this is the thing.
No, it's not just commerce. I think that's when you start, and I'm really glad that you brought up that point, because it's not just like, it's more than just transporting goods across the country, right? I'm not looking for like Dole banana. That is absolutely the case, right? You need goods transported across country, and trains and shipping is far more efficient than any of your 18-wheelers driving down the highway transporting all your goods. 100%. Especially when, what was the statistic? 68% of roads in America were deemed by the Department of Transportation as poor or worse. 68%. That's insane. And delays caused by traffic congestion cost our internal economy $120 billion last year. In the year 2020, $120 billion. And we're talking Amazon packages. We're talking about your Coors Light getting transported down the highway,
Yeah.
or your Target, like all those other semis you see going past you. But shifting back to what you were just talking about, Dad, it's not just goods. It's our people. It's how we as a society is. If you ever looked at a plane or a skyscraper and you see all these people moving around like ants in the roads beneath you, it's how we as a society move about and contribute to our community, whether it's at the city level or the state or as a national community. How do we get people to contribute? So yeah, I think that's the perfect point. That's something that I definitely think about. And gentrification, which we'll definitely talk about at some point.
Well, we tend to just look at ourselves. We tend to just look at ourselves and go, well, I don't care about the roads. I don't care about the train. I don't care about this. But you're missing the bigger picture, that you got to think of society as a living organism with multiple different parts. And in order for the whole system to work, every part, every organ needs to function. And if one organ doesn't function well, the whole organism can have problems and even die. So, what we need to change the perspective of, and part of this podcast is to look more of a holistic thing and look at the United States as more of one organism. We're all part of it, and we need all organs to function 100%. What was that concept in Japan you were talking about? Om?
Oh, the Ome. Yeah, so basically it's, and I'm sorry for any of the listeners that think that I'm butchering this. But as I understand it, how it was explained to me when I first got there, is this idea of an aura. There's a communal aura, and whether you're in public in front of a Starbucks or you're actually on the train and it's moving, it's whisper quiet in the train car. There's no disruption, and it's the same reason Japanese people don't litter, and the streets are very open. It's very clean. It's very safe. Someone once told me, another sailor on my ship, that if you were to drop your wallet, it were to fall out of your pocket in the main of the Hanch, right, which is where all the bars and clubs are in Yokosuka, Japan. If you were to drop your wallet on the ground, you could come back 2 days later and your wallet would just be sitting there on the sidewalk, and because no one would have touched it, it's not theirs. And it's this idea that you are a part of this community, that you are contributing by your presence alone to the atmosphere of the country. And why would you disrupt it? Why would you ruin that atmosphere? Because everyone has to benefit from it. And that's why the urban transportation system is so efficient and so clean that way. And to your point, Dad, it was like when people would go to other countries and they travel, just like me, a lot of people come from Europe or Asia, and we're like, man, this is like, public transportation was awesome. Like this was really, really amazing. It was efficient. It was clean. And then we come to America, and it's that exact issue. It's like, I want to drive my car down the highway. The automobile industry aside, there's that freedom that comes with being an American that we all like to discuss. It's that independence aspect. That's not the communal. It's not the Ome. It's not that I'm a part of a community. It's if I'm driving my car, and everyone's seen this before, I know it annoys the heck out of me, and I know it annoys the heck out of you, Dad. When someone's driving down the city block and they've got the windows down and they're blasting that new jam out their windows, and it's loud as hell. And you're like, why? Why are you revving your bike so loud? Why are you blasting your music? But it's their microcosm. It's their little world that they're a part of.
Now, before anyone is automatically starting to tune out and getting their dander up, we're going socialism, socialism, socialism. You're preaching socialism. Whoa, whoa, time out, back it up. Because that's one of the things that we were talking about earlier that absolutely drives me nuts. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, conservative or liberal, not the point. So for those of you that are automatically going, well, you're talking socialism, socialism. Whoa, whoa. You need to look back historically at the United States, right? And this is one of the things where I think people were asleep in high school history class, right? What history of the United States are we talking about? Now, if you look at a 1950s post-World War II model of the United States, sure, very much every man for himself. Economy is booming, taking off because of geopolitical forces after World War II that allowed the United States to take off. If you go back 200 years to colonial times, to the founding fathers, you go back to the Pilgrims and you look at what were their principles, what were their values, what were their morals, what was their thinking, what were the people who founded this country, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin. You go back and read the works of Benjamin Franklin, not 1950s America. And as I've always said, if a person today were to try to have a conversation with the founding fathers and tell them what America was all about, I think it would be a radically different viewpoint. That would be a pretty heated conversation. Because if you read first primary sources of John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, what their writings were and what they envisioned for this country and how they operated, it's a lot different than what a lot of people call real America, true America. So you take this socialism thing and, oh, that's socialist. Back up. Back in colonial times, you were on the frontier. Now picture yourself here, just trying to keep it simple. Your pilgrims coming over on the Mayflower, your other colonists coming over. You had to band together. You had to be a community. That was survival. Because if you didn't band together, if you were that, I'm going to go out on my own, you were going to die. So this concept we have, this fantasy, which is really a fantasy, of this pioneer going out there by themselves and building their log cabin in the woods and living off the land by themselves, is really a non-real, fictitious, romantic view of what colonial and pre-colonial America was like, right? Pre-colonial America was all about sharing and community. It was all about, we need to build a stockade for all citizens, protect us. That's infrastructure. We need to sit there and have a communal food bank for the winter for all of us, right? So this country, when you go back to what is socialism, what is democracy, and the people that want to vilify socialism or paint anything with taxpayer dollars as socialist and anti-America, needs to go back and read some history books. Needs to really go back and look at what the founding fathers were writing. All right, the founding fathers never intended this. From everything I've read, which is quite a bit, and reading again primary first sources of the founding fathers, there was no mention of every man for himself. Pay no taxes, do whatever you want, individualistic. We don't need infrastructure.
And just to provide a number to that, the Cain article that you were referencing earlier, that just to provide like an actual numerical insight to that, like Jamestown, for example, required 3 days out of a year payment for the plot of street that was in front of your house for man or beast, like for your horse, for your wagon, for what it is, because everyone contributed their section of the road. The whole road would look great, you know?
Yeah, and so it's understanding that America has had, like I said, a love-hate relationship with infrastructure. But to say that infrastructure has never been a part of American society, absolutely absurd. Of course it has. It's been part of American society from day one. Since the Pilgrims set foot on this shore, it has been part of American society. It is American to have infrastructure. It is American to look after the communal good, and it is America to build a better future for all generations. So we need to get over this thinking that is developed very, very recently. I mean, we're talking since about the 1960s, 1970s, this mentality that has arisen that infrastructure is bad, any public service is bad, any taxpayer use for the communal good is bad. Need to get over that, because that is not American. That is not founding father thinking. That is something that has arisen out of an entitled American. Let's face it, we've become a bunch of spoiled children. We benefited from World War II. Europeans, we lived in Europe. Like I said, we lived in England, we lived in Germany. We went to those bomb burned out cities. We've seen pictures. We lived outside Frankfurt, bombed to the ground. Europe was devastated, right? Its factories, its infrastructure was devastated because of the war. We're way over here on the other side of the Atlantic, with the exception of Pearl Harbor. The rest of the United States was untouched in World War II.
And likewise.
Japan, very devastated, as we all know, right? Europe, very, very devastated. China, not yet a rising power. That left the only industrial might in the world, the only factories left alive in the world, was here in the United States. So World War II gave the United States a unique advantage to all of a sudden leapfrog above the other world powers. We went into World War II a rising star. 1940, 1941, the United States was a rising star, but still kind of backseat to France, Britain, Germany. We come out of World War II, they got lambasted during the war. It gave us a chance to leapfrog right over them and become the superstars. And I think what's happened personally, again, I'm not a sociologist, but what I've seen and talking to people, again, outside the United States, living outside the United States, is we kind of, our generation, my generation and beyond, we've kind of grown up very entitled, very spoiled, thinking that we are entitled to this because we're Americans. We get this because we are Americans. We get this because we're the best country on the planet. There's no omnipotent being out there going, oh, you're America, new bridge. You're an American, instant Wi-Fi. Oh, you're an American, highway system. It doesn't work like that. We have highway systems and bridges and canals and ports because the people before us, pre-World War II, invested in it.
Yeah, I think we still have this city on a hill mindset.
We very much do.
Is when you are working with competing powers. And this is two U.S. military veteran and active duty talking about peer and near peer competitors. You can't get so comfortable like recognizing that. So I don't want to just for the sake of the length of this podcast, and I think just to develop our conversation.
I can ramble on. I know.
You and me both. I know the feeling. I think it's important that we take that next step. So we talked a lot about the historical development, how we got to where we are, the importance of infrastructure, where we're lacking. And for these last couple minutes, I just want to take that extra step. What do we need to do, or what is being done? I think in recent, in hot debate is President Biden's the American Jobs Plan, and it's received some criticisms on both sides about whether it's vastness. I think it's a very aggressive bill. There's a lot that I appreciate about it and would like to see developed. But is it the answer that we need? Is it where we need to be heading? Does it prioritize the things that actually need to be prioritized if we're talking about what are the specific issues in infrastructure? I have a couple notes, but Dad, what are your initial takeaways?
For me, the takeaway and segue into the next episode is that I think the country needs to get back united on all fronts, and infrastructure is a great place to start. We were talking about Flint, Michigan, whose lead levels in Flint, Michigan, the water are still unacceptable. We need to fix that. Why? Because they're fellow Americans. If it was our area, we'd want it fixed, right? So I think we need to have these conversations. I think we need to have hard-hitting conversations And that involves a few things. The first off is recognizing that infrastructure in the United States is American. Recognizing that infrastructure in the United States is extremely important, arguably the most important thing right now that we need to be focusing on. The third thing is that it's going to have to come at a cost. We get that, right? But that doesn't mean raising taxes necessarily. It doesn't mean the government needs to do all that. We need to have conversations about, again, the private, the local, the federal level, what combination of things to get infrastructure back to where it needs to be, right? But it's going to start with, like I said, first recognizing that we have problems. Second, recognizing that, hey, infrastructure is important and it is American. And then we need to look at how we're going to fix this.
So part of that conversation involves, as you referenced, who's taking ownership of this. And as I'd like pointed out earlier, the federal government has only decreased its spending on specific infrastructure items over the past 50, 60 years, where Biden's plan, I think, puts a rather aggressive step is the federal assets and the state assets retaking ownership of those sectors, right? And one of the reasons that we see public transportation in other countries thrive is because that it feeds right back into its own system. Those are tickets that citizens are paying for that pay for those infrastructure pieces, right? And then the other aspect, not to go on too much of a tangent from what we're talking about, but is the sustainability of it, where are we using environmentally friendly options? The bill calls for about $25 billion in EV and electrical vehicle charging stations and converting 20% of American school buses to electrical vehicles. Those are options that provide a longer outlook on what makes sustainable infrastructure. And I think takes a little bit of the ownership out of the private sector and puts it back into our government spending.
Right. And I'm not going to pretend to have those answers, but I do think, very much believe we need to have those conversations. I mean, when I lived in England, I wasn't stationed there military. I was a visiting professor in England and Germany and Costa Rica. And when I taught in England, I paid 34% tax rate, right? In Germany, I paid a 40% tax rate, right? So I'm well aware of high taxes in some of the socialist democracies like Germany and England. France is a 60% tax rate. Would I advocate for that? No, I'd be pretty reluctant to do that. However, do we need to sit there and somehow raise the revenue, again, through what the different entities are, to be able to beef up infrastructure? And realizing that I am part of it, whether it's that Japanese OMA or however you want to look at the holistic organism of a city, we need to invest again in like trains. I might not drive the train, but the barista who pours my coffee probably does take the train. So therefore, she doesn't make enough money to completely pay for the train. Should I pay some of that money to the train? Those are the conversations we need to have, but we need to start thinking like that. That infrastructure.
And do we have the reliable structures for our electrical routing, right? Are we doing the repair of our dams? Hoover Dam is now, in such disrepair, and there's the state can't take ownership of it. The local entities can't take ownership of that. Who's willing to pitch in? And how are we electing our leaders to take ownership of those specific assets? We haven't really talked about it so far on this episode, but another huge aspect of infrastructure is our hospitals. What is our, who's paying for our medical expenses? Is it really uniform across our country? Do all citizens have equal opportunity to, the basic treatments? Not even talking about specialized medicine.
Absolutely. But again, and not to beleaguer the point, but we need to start thinking once again as a united country, that we are the United States. United we stand, divided we fall. To me, that's not a cliche. I spent 7 years in our military, 6.5 over in the Persian Gulf. I'm as patriotic, red, white, and blue as they come. But I am a constitutionalist, a founding father American, that we are a united people. And that in order to survive, we need to be united. And therefore we need to go back to start thinking like that, right? Why is universal health care important part of infrastructure? Because again, those people that work on my car, those people that teach my kids, those people that fill the roads, I need them healthy. I need them at work because they need to do the things that keep the city running that I enjoy and use. So therefore, investing in that infrastructure, which includes the technology, the medical, the roads, is in my best interest to do that. And so again, we need to start rethinking like that. And if you think that that's not American, that's socialist, you need to go back and read the original works of our founding fathers and relook at American history books and see what they said about this, right? Not this 1950s post-World War II, every man for himself, neo-American, right? That's not American, and that's not what the founding fathers have. So thinking as united, thinking and investing in our country, thinking as a whole unit, that is as American as it comes. And I'd argue that with anybody.
And that investment for our community in the longest vision possible, and not what will keep our roads, what can fill a pothole for the next 5 years, or 10 years, but what can we create as a sustainable communal base for generations to come? Yeah.
So
well,
until next time.
I think that concludes our episode. Thanks so much for watching. High five.